Okay, hi, welcome to the CIO Institute. Today we're joined by Danny Keating, the Cloud Alliance Leader at Data Intensity, to discuss cloud strategy, a key component to accelerating digital transformation. So it's great to have you here with us today, Danny.
Thank you for having me.
I'll start with the first question. How have organisations' digital transformations plans changed throughout this year?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic and one that we've discussed a lot with our customers and partners alike. I think many organizations are looking to stay ahead of the consumer and adapt to the consumer needs and requirements, and particularly in the last year, our needs have changed massively with the restrictions locally in various different countries and locations that organizations may be located in, but just the way that we're procuring as well, and the expectation of the consumer. I was on an interesting discussion the other day with some retail leaders from Microsoft and HP, and we were talking about how organizations are now looking to stay ahead of that curve, and we now need to really drive transformation from a consumer perspective. And I think that that digital transformation journey is one that we've all been aware of over the last 2 to 3 years, and most companies that we talk to will have some kind of digital transformation strategy, or they'll have somebody in charge of driving transformation. But I think it was one of those buzzword topics that we were seeing in the marketplace, very much like big data and so forth. And I think it's only been the last 6 to 12 months that we've really seen that rapid innovation and companies realizing they have to leverage AI and machine learning and so forth to get to the point of transformation. And I think with the way that we see our consumers less so reliant on going into a physical store, how are the customers making their decisions online? What are they doing? How are they interacting with the organization? It's more important than ever.
Thanks, Danny. Has the cloud played a role in organizations' responses to the challenges brought about this year? And if so, how?
Yeah, I think cloud gives us the ability to adapt and change. I think what it gives us a platform to innovate and to make those decisions that we may have been sort of looking at and thinking about over the last couple of years. However, I think it's still imperative that organizations drive the right kind of strategy and look at the way that they're assessing the options that they have as an organization. I think it's far too easy to think that cloud is the silver bullet to be able to change the way that the organization looks and feels and the fortunes of that company. In addition, I think we've seen technologies like 365, Slack, and Teams, and have exponential growth in the last 9 to 10 months because of the challenges and the changing world that we work within when we're looking to migrate and remold the way that we interact with our employees. And I think cloud's been able to drive that innovation. And I think what organizations have realized is that the speed to change that they've had in the last 9 months compared to probably the last 3 or 4 years, and we've been talking to companies over the last 3 to 4 years that they clearly have a cloud strategy, they clearly have a direction of travel, but getting them to that point of realization and migration is very difficult. And I think what cloud has been able to do in the 10 months is provide customers that ability to adopt and change. And I think we're now, as I mentioned, with the realization that companies can make the change that they need to make rapidly without having to implement, full-scale teams and change control processes and so forth. It's been, I think, a bit of a light bulb moment in many companies that have now realized that they can make these rapid changes. And that should, hopefully only scale moving forward. I think the organizations that are going to struggle are the ones that have long-term legacy environments. How do they get those workloads back into the cloud and make the changes that are underneath the organization? So it's very different depending on the size and the type of organization, but we've certainly seen cloud enable workers to be happy, payrolls to be done. It's been a huge change, but we're continuing that drive, and I think we'll continue to see adoption at a quicker rate of pace.
And what tends to prevent organizations moving to the cloud, and which myths need to be dispelled?
It's a really good question. I mean, we work a lot inside of the Oracle world, and that question always comes up, particularly with the Oracle legacy infrastructure that we typically see in data centers underpinning a lot of critical workloads like finance, payroll, and so forth. And what we see is there's a resistance to change. If we look back at the sort of digital transformation plans that we were talking about earlier on and how that changes companies' views, we can often see that one of the biggest problems that organizations have with digital transformation, cloud adoption in general, is lack of skills and a lack of desire. That's a real problem with companies to really understand and take the employees on a journey that almost relocate their staff into different roles. Traditionally we work with a lot of DBAs. Now that role is becoming less and less reliant as companies move to SaaS-based products or platform as a service. You've got Oracle's autonomous database, so we're seeing certain roles within organizations become less required, and that still needs to, those headcounts still need to be in those organizations, but maybe with different skill sets or cross-training, retraining of the individuals. And we're certainly seeing that is a big problem within many organizations. Customer has the desire, the C-suite are driving that innovation to cloud, but we quite often see that actually some of those preventions can often be internal preventions that there's a technical shortage, or there's a resistance to change from an Oracle database into something like a Postgres environment, or the reluctance to remove a on-premise ERP system into a cloud-based SaaS product. And that's something that organizations find very difficult to admit to or to understand, is that those internal preventions. Aside from that, we've got all of the external influences that we see, budget. Quite often we talk about the sales process, and when we look at things like, traditional qualification methodology that we talk some of our sales members through, where, is there a budget? Is there a need? Quite often, when we talk about cloud technology, there isn't that budget. The business case needs to be made. Organizations need to understand, that there is an upfront cost, but how does that trade off over a 4, 5, 6 year period? And I think, the true partners out there and the real clever individuals will help an organization grasp that feeling. Otherwise, there's always going to be those elements of we don't have the budget, we want to move, but how do we get there? And that's something that we see a lot. And we've developed tools ourselves. Other partners have got theirs, and I think that companies really need to accept and understand that maybe that they're not the holder of all of the key pieces of information, and actually working with a Microsoft, with a data intensity, or an Oracle can help them understand the total cost of ownership. And then, aside from that, the standard cloud fears that we see, security, is my data going to be safe? And, the crux of the matter is that we work with organizations like Microsoft, AWS, IBM, Oracle Cloud. Companies have spent millions on developing security protocol, and it's always striking when we've got conversations with the companies questioning whether or not their data is going to be secure. And then when we start looking at their infrastructure, their operating systems a year or two out of date, or they haven't made the latest patch on Oracle. So it's quite easy to fall behind the security blanket of the prevention to move to cloud. And then, drilling in onto the specifics around sort of what affects the data intensity side of things, and our world, which is Oracle, Microsoft workloads, and moving those legacy type environments, then the natural blockers are around licensing. There's a lot of fear in the marketplace around whether or not there's the ability to move Oracle workloads into the public cloud, and how does that impact ongoing support? How does that impact the pre-existing investment that organizations already made. And what we look to do is help organizations understand the pitfalls and complexities. But there's a lot of fear and unnecessary fear out there around moving Oracle, particularly into the public cloud.
How can data intensity help support organizations with Oracle workloads to transition to the cloud?
From our side of things, it's a good question, and something that we've thought long and hard about over the last sort of year and a half. Data intensity have been doing workload migrations of Oracle for 10 plus years in terms of our own cloud, and early adopters of AWS, strategic adopters of Oracle Cloud Infrastructure when it came out as Gen 1, more latterly Gen 2, and then with our strategic partnerships with the likes of Microsoft, where we are working hand in hand with helping organizations migrate and move Oracle workloads. And what we've seen over the last 2 to 3 years is a real change in some of those attitudes and adoptions. And we just mentioned there around some of those preventions, and we've had to build a methodology that helps companies go through that decision curve, the emotional ups and downs of where a migration and cloud can take us to. And that's some of the early resistance, that initial fear around the objections. We can't move Oracle technology to the cloud. Our strategic platform is Azure, but we don't have the capability because our Oracle rep has told us that we can't move our licensing, or we're a heavy user of Oracle RAC technology. We can't move RAC to the Azure, therefore the migration is not there. And we've had to look at the way that we migrate ourselves and the way that we look to change and transform. And a lot of organizations out there are still picking the problem up of Oracle workloads, taking the whole existing infrastructure, transitioning that into the cloud and moving the whole problem from A to B. And then you still got the same environment stuck in AWS, Azure, or OCI. With the same issues. And what we've had to do is start looking at building a methodology that changes that approach. And I think what we've looked to do certainly is build a fundamental number of steps of understanding. And that starts off with a baseline of the environment. And that's not just looking at Oracle licensing, it's also looking at the workload analysis. So really drilling into specific Oracle technology and the workloads in it themselves. What's Oracle doing now versus what it was meant to be fit for 5 years ago? How many CPUs do we actually require compared to the environment that we've built? How do we transfer Oracle fit for the cloud rather than making the cloud fit to our Oracle environments? And that's exactly where we see a lot of companies making the mistake. They're making the cloud fit Oracle rather than making Oracle fit to the cloud. And that analysis is looking at AWR reports, a lot of the internal scripting that we've built, technologies that we've built around that investigation has helped us really build an understanding. And once we've got that understanding, once we understand the fundamentals of the licensing, whether they're inhibiting or whether there's availability to start reducing some of the CSIs and reducing support spend, that gives us the opportunity then to start building the business case, to start looking at what the migration effort's going to cost and look like, how long it's going to take, what does the proposed cloud platform that we're migrating to look like, how much per annum is that going to cost us, what does that transfer and compare against existing on-premise environments. And those are the things that when we build together what we call Safe Switch and TCOP, it's essentially identifying and baselining the Oracle environment up front to then be able to start building out the migration methodologies and the associated footprints and effort that takes. So we've been doing that now for about a year, and to be fair, the migration activity and the methodology goes back 10 years, but it's an evolution of change, understanding, bringing on individuals like Bijou Thomas into the organization, who runs our global Oracle practice, that's adopted a lot of automation and right sizing so that we fully understand the Oracle workloads, giving a customer a full business plan. So the idea is that when we hand over the details of that TCOP, the total cost of ownership transformation exercise, It's providing the customer with a full-scale business plan to move forward, to be able to make the right educated decisions, to assess whether it's Azure that they need to move to, whether or not actually staying on premise would be wise for some of the workloads, and whether or not there's room to completely reduce operational expenditure.
Lovely. Well, thank you for joining us today, Danny, on the CIO Institute to discuss cloud strategy. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you very much. Cheers.